A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is the story of Star Wars. You can read along with me in your book.
O is for Obi-Wan Kenobi.
All rebel fighters met at fleet headquarters to plan their attack. Princess Leia addressed them.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No, I am your father.
Hello, I am C-3PO, and you are about to listen to the story of Star Wars.
Another chapter is here. Welcome to Don't Burn the Sacred Text. I am one of your hosts, Brandon, and I'm here with my co-host. She's half the angst of Elzar Mann and half the swag of Porter Engle. It's Lindsey.
Thank you, but it depends on the day.
That's why I went half and half, you know?
Yeah, it really depends on the day. Because sometimes it's a little more swag, sometimes it's a little more of the anxiety. But I appreciate it.
Our percentages can shift, you know? You've got a 60-40 day, it balances out with a 70-30 day. I don't know. I don't do math. So we're just going to say that it balances itself out. So how you been lately? Any big news? Anything going on in your life recently?
Oh, just getting married, going on a honeymoon. Nothing crazy.
You know, just little things here and there.
Yeah, just, run of the mill.
Exactly. Well, I'm really excited because on this episode, we're going to be talking about Temptation of the Force by Tessa Gratton. And I got thoughts. I got lots and lots of thoughts, and I got lots and lots of stuff written down. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you are a fan of the books, if you're a fan of Star Wars, make sure you go over and jump on our Patreon. Amanda's putting out episodes rapid fire over there, and you can sign up for just $1, and that goes towards helping our mission to put Star Wars books into classrooms across the country. So we're continuing that mission. If you know a teacher, of course, you can always go to classroomsabers.net, click on the little menu button at the top right corner, and nominate a teacher, because we definitely can send books out to teachers, and I will take any excuse to go to the bookstore. So, give me a reason. And they don't even have to be a Star Wars fan. If you're a teacher, or a teacher who maybe just is starting off, or is moving to a new classroom, or needs help building or rebuilding their library, that's what we're here for. So make sure you go over and do that. And thank you to those of you who are listening who are already a part of our Patreon. We could not do what we do without you guys. So you guys are the best. And we've got so many High Republic books out now. I feel like that's going to start filtering into the books that we're able to give to people. And that's, as we get to the end of this, I'm kind of like thinking of like, what's the long-term impact of this going to be? And, I hope we get to play a little part in spreading the High Republic joy, because I can only speak for myself, but I feel like I can speak for Lindsey in saying that this series has brought us a lot of joy at the very least.
Yeah, no, I would let you speak for me if that's what you're going to say. That sounds like something I would say.
Sounds like something I would say, yeah. We'll just attribute it to it. You know what, in the quotes, when you guys are copying and taking your notes on the episode, just put Lindsey said, and we'll be good to go. But
edit all the Wikipedia pages.
Exactly. But we don't have that many. We've got one more adult novel, I think one more YA, and one more junior novel. So it's wrapping up, and Temptation of the Force is definitely that darker middle chapter. So you want to just go ahead and get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so if it's your first time listening or you don't remember, we rate the books before we have our discussion, and then we come back afterwards and re-rate them based on our conversation, whether it swayed us in one direction or the other. And I'll go ahead and start on this one because, Lindsey, the only chance you have to sway me is in one direction, because I gave this one a 5 out of 5.
Oh, okay. I'm actually really glad to hear that, because I was thinking giving this a 5 out of 5, but also it's one of those, I really, really have to mean it, right? And I have to truly have no real gripes with this. And it's one of those guilty until proven innocence for me, where if I give something a 5 out of 5, it's like, it's not because I wanted to start there and backtrack. It's like, look, I'm going to start at 0 and build my way up. So I was going back and forth because 5 out of 5 seems so special. And, you know, when I say 5 out of 5, like, it's for my favorites, right? It's for Phasma, for Shadow of the Sith. Whereas High Republic isn't necessarily my absolute favorite era by any means, but I would still, I think, give this a 5 out of 5 for reasons we'll get into. I was so impressed. And I think being able to say that there are no real issues with this book, despite it not being my favorite characters or my favorite era, I think says more than anything.
Yeah, it hits on all cylinders, in my opinion. Like, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where I've loved the High Republic, but it's not, you know, the stories that I go to immediately. You know, I think a lot about it now because it's in the zeitgeist, it's in our mind. You know, the stories are coming out, and so we're connecting them to the Acolyte and different things like that, right? So it's on my mind a lot, but it's not like, you know, an Ahsoka or, you know, Luke Skywalker or Leia situation where I'm like, I'm going to be obsessed with this, you know, as soon as I open the first page. They do have to win me over, and there's been some amazing wins, and there's been some difficult losses, and there's been a variety in between. But for me, this one just hit on every cylinder. Even like the prose, the writing. I honestly, and this is a big swing, but I think it's possible to say this. I think it could be the best written book since Revenge of the Sith.
Wow. I expected an extreme statement like that, but you're skipping over all Claudia Gray and going all the way back?
I mean, I'm saying it's a possibility. Like, I'm going off of memory with the Claudia Gray stuff, and her stories are executed perfectly, and she does things like adding the prophecies in Master and Apprentice perfectly. But I don't know if from the first word to the last word, her prose is better than this book. Maybe on par, like I could hear that argument, but this book is just like the metaphors and similes and everything is just so beautifully woven together that it's like, it's honestly a little bit hard to put into words. Like I think about my new favorite book being Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, and I've read that twice now, and I listen to it on audiobook as I'm going to sleep. So like I'm obsessed with the book. It's a beautiful book, and it does the angst and the anger and everything really well. But even that is not as just pure aesthetic beauty as good as this one. Like I think this just really, I mean, it hits the nail on the head. It's hard to really put it any other way until you, in my opinion, until you experience reading it and you just, I don't know, I felt really good while reading it. Like that's the best way to explain it. When you read it, you just feel very comfortable in a good way, even as you're dealing with these challenging topics and subjects that they get into, and you're you know, dealing with this Jedi romance that, spoilers, by the way, we're going to be full spoilers in this thing. You're dealing with this Jedi romance in this will they, won't they? Like you've got all of these different emotions going on, and you feel all of those emotions, but at the same time, the way that it's written, you just feel like you're at home. And I think it's just beautiful.
It is a really interesting blend that's hard to explain, let alone do. But everything feels very consistent throughout while still being true to each character. So what I mean by that is you can really tell when it's Elzar speaking, right? If you were to read a paragraph, just open up any page, read a paragraph, read some text, I bet you would know right away which character it was that was speaking without having to see, like Elzar said, you know, but in terms of the pacing and the cadence of the story and the different plot points, everything is very, very consistent. And we talk a lot about like even things like chapter length and when you go back and forth between certain characters, because there's been books that you and I have discussed where it's like, look, all of a sudden it got to this point and the chapters just went on forever. Or other times where we're really into one character's point of view and the story being told that way, and all of a sudden it's a new chapter and you don't see them again for 4 or 5 more chapters. And by the time you get back there, you're like, oh man, what happened? Where was I? And you got to kind of flip back. This was so steady and easy to follow while still giving a unique voice to every single character, which I thought was really, really hard to pull off.
That's really hard to pull off 100%. And I think part of that you didn't bring up is the balancing of the types of scenes that we get. There was the perfect amount of romance. There was the perfect amount of action. There was a perfect amount of intrigue and drama. Like, that also felt balanced the same way that you were saying the chapter lengths and the character development and all of that stuff felt balanced. I felt like we got kind of like every aspect of Star Wars in this book, except for like super weird Force stuff. But we even got, cool Force stuff. But it just, it fit.
I distinctly remember being very caught up in what was happening and really enjoying. I think we were on Naboo and really enjoying that. But as I was turning a page, I was like, what the hell is Marchion Ro been up to? Like, we might want to go back to him. And I kid you not, I turned the page and bam, first 2 words, Marchion Ro. I was like, this is it. And that was I think my big aha moment just for Tessa Gratton, where it's like, oh, she understands like how long you should really be with these characters, right? I think back to all of my years as a camp counselor, and at the start of every summer, our camp director would wheel out a whiteboard and he would make a big bell curve on the whiteboard. And he would explain to us, he goes, this is how it goes when you introduce a new game, right? Whether it's some variation of tag, dodgeball, whatever it is, he goes, you introduce it, you explain it, no one's really that into it. All of a sudden they start playing it and that's all they want to do. They're playing. And then after about an hour, everyone's kind of over the game. And he goes, you want to cut it off right here. And he marks not quite the peak of the bell curve, but right before it. He goes, right before these kids are having like the maximum amount of fun that they will have playing this game, that's when you stop playing. Because later on, you're going to be able to say like, hey guys, this is going to be your reward if we do this, right? If you guys do this, we can play this game. He goes, as long as you cut a game off here, they're always going to want to play it again. If you go too far, they're not going to want to play it again. And I bring this up because that's how I feel with her writing different chapters and characters, where it's like she cuts you off right before you are at the peak of being totally invested, or at the peak enjoyment or the peak suspense. She cuts you right off where, granted, yeah, you're really happy to go back to Bury, go back to Marchion Ro, go back to Xylon. But like, even though you're happy with what you're doing now, you're still just as happy when it's time to go back to what you just left. And that's so difficult. And I think we've both seen it ruin other books, but it was such a credit and such a testament to this one.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. It really does. And when you're looking at like a character like Marchion and how much we get with him, we don't get a ton, like, especially compared to something like Eye of Darkness. I feel like we got a lot more of him. And that was kind of frustrating to me because I was wanting more, kind of like you were saying. And then I realized, oh, this is exactly what's happening to the Jedi. They're getting distracted by these other things. Oh, now I'm focusing on the Dren gear being back, and now we've got another problem in the Blight on top of the Levelers, which is something we still haven't solved yet. And then Marchion just felt like he was getting lost in the background. And then once, I think it was Avar brought up, like, guys, we need to be going back and focusing on Marchion because he's the one that ties all these things together. I was like, yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly what I wanted. And I realized, yep, that was exactly what she was trying to do. And I think back to her story in Tales of Light and Life with Marta Rowe. And I was so frustrated at the beginning of that story because I was like, this is so chaotic and it's just really uncomfortable to read. And then I realized that's the point. She's trying to make you feel this way. And she continued that in this book in a completely different style than that. With, when you look at, for example, the Elzar and Avar romance, like, it's not overplayed. It's not overly sappy. You really get invested and believe, I did anyways, that this is the best path for the both of them, is to follow this instinct, which is something that we haven't seen with the Jedi before.
So I feel like at some point we have to get into the actual meat of the book.
Yes, absolutely.
But before we do, I do want to point out, because not only with that kind of love storyline, but even between Xylon Graf and Care, and not only just the romantic relationships, but really any relationship, right? Whether it's I was personally really struck by the relationship between the Chancellor and Elzar. And when you look at mother-daughter relationships, there's a lot of different relationships, good or bad here. And that can be really difficult to do without coming across as cheesy. What Tessa Gratton does really well is when she is describing someone's emotion, she usually seems to do it from someone else's point of view, which makes it less cheesy in a way, and I'll give some examples where there are some other books in the High Republic, especially, that when they are describing, the person they love, who they're looking at, it's just stars in my eyes and they're the best thing and they're so beautiful, and it comes across as
you can say out of the shadows, it's okay.
Yeah, it is. I don't want to lose anyone who's really into that book, but that is, I can't believe you just called me out. That is 100% what I was thinking of. But it comes across as, I don't want to say disingenuous, but you're sitting there and you're just like, this isn't real love, right? This is infatuation. But what's so cool in this book is I feel like maybe 80% of the time when you are looking at relationships, it's being described from the outside, and usually by someone with the Force who has some more intuition into feelings. So when you can say, even Avar is normally the one to be like, what she's sensing from Elzar, or vice versa. Where there's a few great scenes where Xylon and Kara are interacting, and it's Avar or Venestra who seem to be the ones to pick up on the weird vibes or the nice vibes that they're picking up. And I just thought that was such a more natural way to explain these relationships, and something that really worked for me.
I hadn't thought about it from that angle. The one counter that I would have would be Elzar, because I think that he has been so unhealthily, if that's a word, caught up in his feelings for a long time. And now we get to see him very introspective in a healthy way. And it for a long time, Elzar has been taunted haunted by the actions that he's taken, right? And he has started to identify those actions as his identity. And here we get a lot of introspection with him starting to see who he really is. It's kind of similar to what we got with Stellan, right in The Fallen Star, right? So I was freaking out going, okay, Elzar's going to die now, because of course they would kill off, another main Jedi character. Thankfully, no, yet. I feel like we should always include a yet in High Republic.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool, especially when he's thinking about his reactions to Avar and the way that she helps him find his balance, and the way that he can just pull off of her energy to kind of become the best version of himself, I thought was a really good way to get the audience invested in the idea that the Elzar and Avar relationship was right? And then you go on the flip side, kind of like you said, and you have Avar, and she's noticing Elzar's feelings too, which we already kind of trust Avar in a lot of ways to be pure, and so we don't need a lot of time beyond her saying like, no, I feel like this is right, to go like, okay, cool, this is right. But with Elzar, we do, because he's been on, tempted to the dark side so often in the series so far, and so we kind of got like a double whopper there with Elzar's feelings that I thought really allowed for me to be invested in, not only do I want this relationship to happen, but I genuinely believe at this point that it's the right thing and that it's going to be part of the solution of all of these problems, rather than what we originally thought, which was it was going to be part of the reason that the Jedi stopped allowing attachments and why Anakin had to hide his relationship with Padme. I think we're going in a completely different direction with it.
Yeah, no, it is a lot of fun to watch and take part of, because I think we've seen so many Jedi with, granted, personality differences, but this is like a true what they are struggling with differences. And the only other time I remember seeing it to this extreme and this well done was going back to Claudia Gray, Master and Apprentice. And I cannot believe his name is escaping me now, but Dooku's former apprentice, who just, who cares? We're not supposed to be celibate kind of thing.
Yeah. but it starts with an R. I can't remember it either now.
It does, yeah. I want to say Raul for some reason, but I don't think that's it. I feel like it starts with an R and was 4 letters. But yeah, it's something like that where it's not just, hey, here's the funny Jedi, here's the relaxed Jedi, here's the Obi-Wan versus Quinlan Vos Jedi. Like, it's very different things that they are struggling with, that I think has just been so interesting to read, and gives him a lot of depth, but also keeps me hanging on in a little bit of a different way. And listen, you said they struggle with, is this right? Should I be doing this? Look, when you have Master Yoda's blessing that, yeah, you can do this, who's going to argue with that? I thought that was a very, very, very bold and interesting scene to include here. I'm happy that it's included. But when you have Master Yoda himself being like, no, attachment's fine. Like, you can love, you should love. I love everything every day. I thought that was a interesting take I wasn't expecting.
Well, and it happened on an elevator, which was so cool, because to me that kind of is a reflection of the Obi-Wan Anakin elevator scene.
Yep.
Where it's like, that was the master kind of not giving the apprentice permission, and here we have the reverse. And also, how are we not screaming already about the fact that Elzar got offered a spot on the council? How much did you freak out when that happened?
I actually kind of had a feeling that was coming.
Really?
Yeah. That one didn't really take me by surprise. Him not accepting it took me by surprise. But the actual
that
offer
I kind of expected. It's funny.
No, the offer itself did not surprise me.
Like I said, I was the reverse of you, where I was shocked when it happened, and then the longer we didn't talk about it, the more I was like, he's not gonna do this, or he's gonna die before he can make a decision.
Even when he turned it down, I thought this was going to be like he'll have some kind of revelation and he'll want it again and go back and ask to have it. But yeah, I did not expect him to really permanently turn it down.
I mean, that seems to be the trend, if you get offered a spot on the Jedi Council, turn it down,
The coolest ones do.
The cool ones do, that's right. So...
or be like Anakin and ask for it and then be turned down.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked a little bit about Elzar and Avar, but really with all of these Jedi, I feel like we're finally starting to get some solutions, which is funny to say because we've now added in the return of the Drengir and the problem of the Blight. So we've now got, if you kind of categorize them, we've got the Blight, we've got the Drengir, we've got the Levelers, we have Marchion Ro and the Nile. So we have 4 different things that we need specific answers to or solutions to, and we don't have those yet. I guess we're going to probably get them all in the next couple of books. But as far as the individual Jedis and their paths go, I feel like we're starting to finally get some of those resolutions that we've been clamoring for. You know, the closer we've gotten to the finale of this series, the more we're like, they don't have a lot of time to solve all of these things. And I feel like this book kind of solved, in a way, a lot of the internal conflicts for these major Jedi characters. Of course, you know, Elzar and Avar embracing their relationship, you know, thinking about Burry and him becoming very adamant about using his empathic abilities, Bell trusting somebody again after the loss of his 2 masters, you know, and being willing to, in a way, play sidekick to Burry. You know, even Vernestra, who is a character who has suffered great loss, who has questioned whether she is the right person to be in the position that she's in, is now with Burry the one that's taking down a leveler for the first time, which was so freaking cool. So we've got these Jedi that are finally finding themselves and fixing those internal struggles that I think is a really nice way to set up for these last few books, to keep them really action-packed and focused more on the external struggle. We'll, of course, get development internally, because that's just how things go. And the things that they kind of learned in this book, I think, are the things that are going to help them solve those external struggles. That's just how fiction works. Nothing surprising there. But how did you feel about the way, beyond Elzar and Avar, because I think we kind of agree, we really like what they did with the relationship there and the execution there, all the other Jedi, and you can pick and choose whoever you want to talk about, how do you feel about the way that they are kind of wrapping up their internal battles specifically?
Yeah, I mean, Vernestra Ro right now for me is a very interesting one, through no fault of anyone, but being that we're a couple weeks into the Acolyte by the time you and I had really finished this and been ready to go, it's always strange knowing what's to come, because you're kind of trying to connect the dots of not just like, oh, okay, this is what I know about her to date, and I'm going to be on this journey with her, but seeing now who she is as an adult, a much, much older adult, but seeing the way she carries herself, where she is now, all of that one is interesting to me, because I think I'm looking for the wrong things, instead of just letting myself take a step back and enjoying what's to come. Everyone else, though, I am so thrilled with, because it hasn't been easy. And this is kind of the beauty of how many books there are in the High Republic. Everything feels so earned to me. Really does. And to now have these you put it so beautifully, where they're going to figure out the external conflicts because of what they learned internally. But the fact that everyone seems involved in each one's kind of internal discoveries is another really neat aspect to me, that we don't get too often in Star Wars or out of Star Wars. I think everyone's kind of, here's me, here's my thing, here's what I'm struggling with. But being able to see other Jedi from someone else's point of view, and the other Jedi recognizing the growth in them and feeling that pride, I think is really special. So I'm not only happy with the way each character is evolving, but with the relationships and how proud the other ones seem to be on the same page as us, right? Kind of always rooting for this.
Yeah, and not expecting too much of anybody. You know, like, I love that scene outside of the Jedi Council chamber where I can't remember if it's Vernestra that's saying it to Burry or if it's Bell, but they're basically, the 3 of them are there and they're having a conversation, and maybe Avar comes by, but the point of the scene is that they're telling Burry, like, just go in and tell the council what happened. And tell them that you don't know how it happened. Tell them that you don't know how to replicate it.
I think it was Renestra, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, you did something really special. That's really important. Let's try to figure out what it is, but we're not going to hold a grudge against you for not knowing, right? And so it reminded me a lot of like when I conference with my students, and I'll be like, hey, you improved by 20 points. Like, what did you do differently? And they kind of look at me and they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you need to know. You're the one who took the test. You're the one who wrote the paper. Like, what did you do differently? And they're like, I don't know. And then I just look at them and go, we got to figure that out, because whatever it was worked. And I kind of felt like that with the Jedi Council, where they're trying to get to the root of, like, is it deep down in there where you just don't want to admit it to yourself, or do you genuinely not know what the cause was? And I think for Burry, it's kind of a mix of the two, because he's a character that kind of thinks he's extremely humble. So he doesn't, struggle with pride. He doesn't think too much of himself. And so it's harder to give himself the accolades and recognize the special things that he is capable of doing from the point of view of himself, right? And so going in there to the Jedi Council and facing them and having them basically say, okay, like, this is how it happened. We're going to try to figure out how to replicate it, but we're not going to hold a grudge against you for not being perfect, I thought was really a great scene, and one of those things where you just go, would have been nice if you did that for Anakin, like, it shows the de-evolution.
There's a deep contrast there.
Yeah, it's really, and you have it with these two characters in Anakin and Burry, who on the surface couldn't be more different, but really when you get down to their core, they're two characters that just feel a lot. Right? And one of them is taught and trained to use that as a strength. And so when he goes in and he's feeling insecure about that, he's told to trust in that training. And then the other one is told to shut those feelings down. And when he can't figure out how to shut them down because they're so overwhelming, he's told he's imperfect and he's not worthy. It's a real, like you said, it's a real deep contrast in the psychology of the Jedi Order and their approach to these different characters.
Well, not only that, but when looking at the ideology and the relationship between each one of these characters and the openness with their struggles, which is something you really don't see that often by the time we get to Anakin. I think everyone kind of struggles and wants to hide it because it's a sign of weakness, whereas these guys are so open with what they're dealing with and going through, where I wouldn't say they go through things together, but they're just so knowledgeable and supportive of each one's struggles. And why I think it's going to be so important is you mentioned earlier that we have 2 books to wrap up 4 problems. I would not be shocked if the solution to all of those problems, I don't think they're going to be the exact same, but I think they're all going to intertwine. And the only way it would be possible to close out all 4 problems in the short time we have left is if we can now all kind of work together where it's, hey, look, because Burry was open about this, Vernestra is able to do this because she knows, and Avar is able to do this because she knows what happened here. So I think that openness is going to come into play, not just in a character growth type of way, but in a moving the plot forward kind of way.
Absolutely agree. I keep thinking back to what the creators of the High Republic said at the beginning of the initiative, and the question that they asked themselves was, what do the Jedi fear, right? And fear is an aspect of how Burry and Vernestra kill the nameless that they do, right? And so when Burry's explaining it to the council, he says the fear, his own and Bell's, everyone's, gave him direction, and he guessed where the creature was by the strength of the fear, and then he threw his lightsaber. So that fear is going to be an aspect of it and what they do with it. And I think that's going to take all of them together, because if you go then later to the end when Avar is connecting them and they're battling against the Nameless, you know, they're having to embrace that fear together. And all of your problems kind of center around that idea of fear. You've got the levelers who create the fear. You've got the Drengir who are now afraid. You have the Blight that everyone is afraid of. And then you have Marcion Ro, who is kind of becoming the manifestation of fear in two ways. Like, he's the manifestation of fear for the Jedi Order, like he's the main bad guy, but also within himself, he is becoming representative of fear, which I think is kind of what him seeing Marta is starting to represent, is that like fear consuming him, the fear of, you know, whatever it is that he's not going to be able to accomplish or not be able to figure out. Like he hides it behind the ego, but I feel like that's what's going on there.
Well, he weaponizes it though, which is the other cool, you know, it's not just, oh, he is embodying this, oh, he's the personification of this. Yes, he is. But he's the only one here who realizes that this is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
If you can harness it. So it's so funny because I feel like in Marcion's mind, it's a matter of, look, I am all these things, right? I am the Blight, I am the Nameless, I am the Drengir. Maybe not the Drengir, but the other two. But I
am responsible for the Drengir.
Yes. But he thinks he has this deep control over everything, where I think in his mind, he's kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? The master boss. What is it in video games? You know what I'm thinking of. Thank you. The final boss.
He's the Rock. He's the final boss.
Yeah. But I think in his mind, it's like these things can't be defeated unless he is. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very interesting to see if that's right. And then dive into, if that's the case, what does that mean about the human condition and the state of fear and who holds power? If he's wrong, it's going to be, I think, the same questions, but very different answers, which is just, to me, a really cool topic to play with. And I should know this offhand, but I don't. Do you know who's writing the final one?
I think it's Charles Soule.
I was just going to say, I hope it's Charles Soule, because that, or I would say Kevin Scott, are really the two who I think could handle those kind of questions being asked. But I think that's going to be really, when we look back on the finality of Temptation of the High Republic, that's going to be the takeaway to me, is what does all of this say about the true human condition? And what did we learn, not just from the Jedi, who it's so funny to me because the Jedi are always the ideal, right? The moral idea. And I said to you yesterday, like, I hate Star Wars because it gave me a moral compass, and sometimes I just want to get angry or not do the right thing. But to see them at their pinnacle moment, and they are the ideal of the ideal, I think that's less interesting than saying, what did we learn on the flip side? What did we learn from just other standard beings? So it's going to be crazy to watch, but I think Temptation of the Force is the absolute perfect jumping off point to get there.
Totally agree. And I think on top of what you said, we're going to get the Jedi and the people that are working with the Jedi, these characters who are supposed to be anti-fear, having to learn to embrace their fear, right? And on the flip side, you've got the Darksiders who are supposed to be all about fear, you know, speaking specifically of Marcion, and that he's trying to weaponize that fear, and it's going to consume him, and it's ultimately going to be his downfall. And I think, of course, that'll lead to the questions that you brought up. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it's this book is so good that it's hard to nail down, like, what are the specific things that we want to talk about, because it's to me, it's the perfect example of Star Wars answering a lot of questions and setting up the future questions that we need to ask, right? And one of those, of course, like, is the Blight, which is this new problem that we have. And we learned more about it in this book than we did in Defy the Storm. Makes sense, because in Defy the Storm we just discovered it. But I like how they talked about it, where Elzar's feeling the blight, and I think Burry says something similar, but Elzar's thinking it was like a wound in the Force itself. What do you think that they're going to do with the blight? Because I think that's kind of like my biggest question going forward. If this isn't actually a wound in the Force, like, what do you think they're leading to in that regard, and kind of connecting back to what you were saying about the human condition and everything?
I don't know, because the one that sticks out to me the most as far as kind of the quote in describing the blight is when Kara is saying it didn't hurt, right? Like you would look down and see this being dripped, but unlike the Nameless, it didn't hurt. There was no fear. It was just kind of sucking the life out, but almost, he doesn't say peacefully, but I would imagine if it doesn't hurt and you're just watching it happen, almost peacefully.
With peace
so
and
I would
purpose,
say
you could say?
with peace and purpose. So I would say the blight is, I think my if I had to rank the 4 problems to be solved, the second most interesting to me, because it is so terribly uncommon, right? There is nothing to compare it to. We're like, yeah, we have faced other creatures and won. We faced other people and won. This is such a mystery of both what is it and then how do we beat this, or do we beat this, right? This is an insane thought, but look, the planets that we have the blight, they're new to us. We don't know what happened to them. We don't know where they're at 100 years later, if they're anywhere. So it's just a very interesting problem, and one that is obviously going to be wrapped up very quickly. To only have this for a total of 4 books out of the dozens we've had in this era, that's a wild, wild concept. But yeah, I have no idea what it is, how to beat it. But as far as what it means, I think we're going to have to stick with Marchion Ro a little bit longer and really figure that out.
Yeah, because I think he has the answers, which of course is part of the reason he goes to Coruscant at the end. I think that, the quote you pulled out and the quote I pulled out, they're obviously go together because they're both talking about the blight, but they're not super disconnected, because you can have a wound that doesn't hurt, right? And to me, when you say like wound is not a word that conveys pain or agony. It conveys a past injury. You look at Last Jedi when Snoke says, "How's your wound?" And it's, speaking about Kylo's scar. Obviously he's alluding to, the internal struggle that he's having, the failure that scar represents, all of that stuff, right? But here, I think the wound can kind of go with that lack of hunger that it talks about, that peacefulness that it talks about.
Well, to me, wound also means, and I realize it can mean different things to different people, which is why I want to say it out loud and hear your thoughts. When I think of wound, I think an open cut. I don't think a break or anything like that. I don't think something fatal. I think truly just an open wound, an open cut. So to me, it's almost like something is opening up in the Force and there is nothing to fill its place. But do you feel that way? Or would you think wound means something like, hey, it could be, a broken bone could be a wound, I guess.
No, I think,
but how do you take
kind of
wound to
makes
mean?
sense?
Yeah.
Like a gap in the Force, like not where the Force is not present, because I don't like that idea coming from the Heir to the Empire trilogy. That's one thing that really bothers me about that series, because the Force is in everything. But at the same time, the idea of a gap in the Force is really compelling, and the fact that the levelers are afraid of it, that's really interesting to me. Like, they don't want to touch it when they are something that feeds off of the Force. So you would think that something that is, just for lack of a better term, we'll say absent of the Force, you would think it wouldn't be that big of a deal to them because it wouldn't be a danger, but it's kind of the reverse where they are afraid of it because it lacks the thing that they are obsessed with consuming and the thing that they use to cause pain to others. So the whole idea of it is really compelling. I think a gap is a good way to describe it, where maybe the Jedi and these connections that they're making are what fill that gap, right? Because Star Wars is about working together. It's about our bonds and our relationships and our found families and all of those things. And of course, in this one, we talked about the characters are kind of getting into groups. You've got Avar and Elzar. You've got Burry and Bell and Vernestra. You've got, Care and Xylan. You have these characters, and everybody goes with at least one other person in some way, shape, or form. And so when they bond together, they're strong enough to push back against the Leveler. I don't think it's a stretch to say, and we've already seen with Burry that they can use the Force to push back the Blight. So I think maybe the Jedi are going to find a way to fill that gap, to heal that wound, however you want to phrase it. That's going to come down to their connection with each other, right? Because look at the other planet-destroying things that we've had in the galaxy far, far away, and all of them get defeated because people work together. The first Death Star, the second Death Star, the Starkiller Base Death Star, the Star Destroyer Death Stars, all of them get destroyed because people work together. And a lot of times that was, save for the first Death Star, that wasn't with Force users, but I think
so what you're saying is this is a star.
It's a Star War. For sure.
I'm just noticing the pattern. If it's going to kill a planet, it's going to have the word star in it.
Yeah, basically.
The Blight Star.
The Star Blight. Yes, I like it.
Star Blight. The
Star Blight, Star Knight. So do you have any ideas on kind of how, other than the fact that, like you said already, they're going to kind of work together, or they're going to solve the problems at the same time. Do you have any other ideas or predictions about how they're going to wrap up any of these problems, all of these problems?
I wish I did. I truly, truly wish and I usually try to have some crazy theory to throw out there, tinfoil hat, maybe a little more realistic. This, though, I am so at a loss for what comes next, but it's a really, really, really fun place to be, especially as a Star Wars fan, where we live in the area of trying to predict what's going to happen next and then getting upset when it does or doesn't happen.
That never happens.
No, because if it does happen, it wasn't predictable. If it doesn't happen, it's not what I predicted. but this time around, I truly have no idea what is going to come. So I think I'm going to be really, really happy. I just hope that whatever does come, it's not just wow, this was so cool. I hope it is as beautifully written as this one was.
I mean, if it's Charles Soule, it's for sure going to be.
I trust it. Yeah.
I think the idea of not being able to predict what's coming is a really cool place to be in Star Wars. And in a weird way, I don't want to predict what's coming like I do with other things, not because of a lack of investment, but because I've been so rewarded so far with the story that they've told us that I just have a level of faith and trust that even if it's not perfect, even if it's not my absolute favorite way that it could have been solved, even if I have critiques of it, I have a confidence that I'm going to be pleased with what they give us. And the end of the book set up for that with, of course, Marchion going to Coruscant, which we'll get to and talk about in just a minute. But I want to focus first on kind of what gets Marchion there, because we've got, for me, we're finally getting the payoff for Phase 2 of the High Republic, because they're bringing back the Rod of Power and, of course, bringing back Martiro. My critique, and this would be my one... This isn't even a critique of this book, it's a critique of the High Republic as a whole. I really feel like, based on what we have so far, this could completely change once we get the last installment. But I feel like we didn't need Phase 2 of the High Republic. Am I wrong there? Like, not enjoyed it, not wanted it, but did we need it?
Listen, I try and keep this podcast to the books, right? We have Sith Talk that you and I do. We have the flagship show on Clashing Sabers. We have other areas to talk about other things. I'm realizing with some of the new content, The Acolyte, coming out, I think Phase 2 of the High Republic might just be more for laying the foundation for other things than it is completing Phase 1 or building off of in Phase 3. I think things like, hey, these Force cults are kind of needed to explain some of the events of the Acolyte and so on and so forth. So while I get what you're saying about do we need Phase 2 based off of what we know now? Not really.
Yeah, that's something that kind of bugged me.
I think we're going to need it in other materials for other reasons.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes back to that bell curve thing you were talking about earlier. Like they took us back to Phase 2 right when we were really invested in the characters of Phase 1, and then they kind of introduced new things. And of course, they set up things like Porter Angle and stuff like that. Like there are some things, but real payoff wise, like I felt like, okay, we got Marta back, but they never call her Marta Rowe. It's always just his great grandmother. You have to know it already, and I didn't feel like it made a difference if you did. But
where we are at now, like you said, this could change in the next 2 books. But where we're at now, I think a person could very easily read all of Phase 1 and all of Phase 3 and be in the know of what's going on, right? It's not like they missed any big detail where it's like, oh, I don't get this one book or this one storyline because I didn't read Phase 2 yet.
Yeah. I think honestly, like, I might refer people to doing that. Like, read Phase 1 and 3 back to back, and then go back and read Phase 2. But we'll have to see. It's hard to make any definitive statements when you don't have the whole story. What a concept, people. Maybe we wait till we have the whole story before we start judging. But speaking of individual stories and elements that we want to talk about leading to the future, we've got the end of the book where Marchion Ro goes to Coruscant, which I'm reading this book called Star Wars FAQ, and it's a unauthorized history of Star Wars. And something that really stood out to me as I was reading it is in the original drafts of Return of the Jedi, the rebels were supposed to attack the Imperial home planet, which was called something different than Coruscant, but it was basically Coruscant. And of course, in the Trevorrow draft of Duel of the Fates of Episode 9, they get this attack on the home planet on Coruscant. So I thought it was pretty interesting looking at the history of Star Wars that now we actually are having somebody going into the home world of the major entity that's ruling the galaxy at the time, of course being the Republic in this case. And he has no business being there. It makes no sense for him to be there, but damn, does Marchion just walk in like he owns the place. Like, he just absolutely stole the scene. And I mean, he steals every scene he's in my opinion. But how are you feeling about Marchion Ro on Coruscant and him being, as he says, their only hope?
I mean, I think it's so important because for the life of me, believe it or not, I don't even remember if it's this book or a different one. But yeah, I think it is this book in the beginning where Elzar is talking about the people of Coruscant kind of just go about their day, right? And they don't seem to care that all of these things are going on in the galaxy because it doesn't affect them. And that is a very common thing that's played around with in these genres. I always think going back to like the Hunger Games, you know, you have the people in the Capitol who, what does it matter to them, right? They have all their money, they have their entertainment, their lives are almost better off because of this. I took it more so as this is so important because we are finally going to impact the people on Coruscant where they understand the gravity of this situation. So it's going to be interesting. I can't really think of a time in these kind of sci-fi fantasy-esque genres where this has been done really, really well. Game of Thrones tried to do it, didn't land the way they thought it would. So I hope that it is done well.
Yeah, I have a lot of faith that it's going to be done well. Like, I feel like they already know everything that's going to happen in the last book, and I feel like they've known for a long time. Like, I think they've planned things out more than we've probably ever seen in Star Wars before. Like, I think the thing you could argue was the most planned out before the Disney era would have been the prequels, and because it definitely wasn't the original trilogy, no matter what people want to say. And so I think they've got this all figured out. I think they know exactly where they are leading, and I just have, again, I have a confidence in this is going to land one way or the other. And I'd be really interested to see, and I think it would be really a cool angle to take, is if Marchion brings the blight to Coruscant, and that's part of the solution, is feeding it part of Coruscant. Because at the end, you know, it says, the very last line is, the wildflowers drifted down as light as the petals were, disintegrating into ashes lost to the morning breeze. Like, he brings this little bit of the blight to Coruscant. What if they end up bringing a bigger portion of it? Like, there's so many possibilities that I have running in my head, and all of them are equally possible. I am equally invested in any of them happening as I am none of them happening. So it's going to be a wild ride to the end. We've got, I think the next book comes out in August. Is that right?
I'm not even kidding you. Just last night I was Googling trying to figure out when the release date was, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
I'm going to have to pull up my Amazon account now and figure out when this book comes out. I know the final installment in the adult portion of the High Republic comes out in 2025. So we've got a while to get to that. Okay, so we've got a middle grade novel by Zoraida Cordova, Beware the Nameless, comes out August 27th. And then we have Tears of the Nameless, which is George Mann, which is a YA that's coming out September 24th. So we've got a couple months until we get those stories and figure out the direction that those go. Of course, both of those talk about the Nameless. So maybe we go in that direction in those books and solve that problem. And then the adult novel focuses on those other three that we talked about. We don't know, but we're going to be here to discuss it. So again, make sure you're following along with us as we do so. So Lindsay, let's go ahead and close it out. Do you have any final thoughts or things you wanted to bring up before we give our final ratings?
Give Tessa Gratton so many more books, please. I think she is the next Claudia Gray. Just so pleased with all of it, because you could give a bad writer good material and it's still going to be okay. I don't know if this material would have been as amazing if it wasn't her writing. So those are my closing thoughts.
And I will second those. I will let you speak for me in this case. So perfect. Are you keeping it at a 5 out of 5?
I am.
Yeah.
I definitely am.
Yeah, same for me. You had very little chance of swaying my opinion, and you being at a 5 out of 5 basically decided that from the get-go. So let us know what you guys would rate this book. Of course, you can always do that over on our social channels. Everything is at Clashing Sabers, or over on our Facebook group, Star Wars Clashing Sabers. Just comment on this post when we put it up and let us know what you thought about this book and your theories about where things are headed and how you're just feeling about the High Republic as a whole. Of course, if you want more of what we're doing, I already talked about our Patreon that you can go over and join and get bonus episodes and support a good cause. And then, of course, you can subscribe wherever you're listening now and get all of our stories, all of our podcasts in one feed at one time. I say stories because we do that now. Mark is putting out audio dramas that he's working on. He's put out part 2 recently of his series. It's going to be 5 parts. He's put a lot of energy into, so make sure you go check that out. And, of course, Lindsey and I are on Sith Talk. I'm over on the Clashing Sabers podcast. We've got a lot going on, so just make sure you're subscribed, and you'll get all of those at once. Lindsey, if people want to find you, talk with you, tell you why you're right about Temptation of the Force, where can they be?
You guys can find me over on X. I'm still getting used to not calling it Twitter, but you can find me over there at the Lady of Lore.
It's perfectly fine to still call it Twitter.
It is, right? The kids are still doing it?
Yes.
All right, good. But no, the best place to get not only me, but everyone is head over to Facebook, Star Wars Clashing Sabers, and join that group. And we always love having discussions there, continuing discussions, and seeing what you're working on. So if you have a cool podcast, a piece of art, fan fiction, whatever it is, drop it there. I will say the only disclaimer is make sure you tag us if you do want us to see something. But head over there, join that group. Super supportive and inclusive community.
So while you're doing that, make sure you keep reading and keep writing. But whatever you do, don't burn the sacred text. All Clashing Sabers productions are the intellectual property of the Clashing Sabers Network and ClashingSabers.net. All licensed sounds and images are the property of their respective copyright holders and are used for informational and educational purposes only. For more information on our nonprofit or to nominate a teacher, go to ClashingSabers.net. For questions or inquiries, please email us at ClashingSabersNetwork@gmail.com.
You're just going to walk away?